can see it in the boxes. We can see it in the columns and pillars. Single piece, precise and symmetrically carved granite versus stacked rounds of far softer sandstone. Still impressive, but just not the same thing. We also see it in the story of the amazing stone vases, a story I've explained and explored in detail in a couple of videos linked below. But the roughly 40,000 incredibly turned and precision-made stone vessels are vastly different to the industry of hand-carved alabaster vessels that came after. Even the pyramids themselves, the massive and mighty megalithic pyramids of Giza, Dashur and Meidum, are both amongst the first pyramids ever supposedly made by the dynastic Egyptians, and entirely different and superior constructions to any later effort at pyramid building, many of which were nothing more than piles of mud bricks that are mostly long gone today. The Old Kingdom pyramids highlights one of the other major contradictions in our current perspective on the past, that the technologically superior work, that which displays characteristics and features that can't be explained by simple hand tools, always seems to come from the earliest periods, and are older than the inferior examples that came later. How is this possible? It just doesn't make sense from the perspective of technological progression in an average human civilization. Going back to the aforementioned vases and vessels made with precision from incredibly hard stone, they stretch far back into pre-dynastic times, with the vast majority of them being attributed to the 3rd or 4th dynasty. This is due to where they were found, beneath the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. Even though they were found here, today, in the museum that's on that site, they are explained as heirlooms, inherited from earlier times. None of these types of vessels were ever made again after the 4th dynasty. Did this craft somehow disappear suddenly and entirely from the toolbox of the ancient Egyptians? Or did King Djoser just hoover up all of the heirlooms that he could find, scratch his name into a few of them, and have them buried with him under his step pyramid? The alabaster vases that were produced after this period don't show any of the same sophistication, precision or symmetry of the earlier stone vessels, and alabaster is orders of magnitude softer and easier to work than the materials used in the older stone vases. The single-piece granite columns and pillars tell a similar story. Many of these come to us from Old Kingdom sites like Giza, Saqqara or Abu Sir, while later constructions in places like Karnak or Luxor use the stacked blocks of sandstone technique. Sandstone is much softer than granite, and though these are all still impressive and awe-inspiring to see today, they are nowhere near the technical achievement of tapered, palm-shaped single-piece columns quarried and carved from greatly harder and heavier stone. We also see this contradiction of older precision work in the boxes of Egypt. Supposedly the very first single-piece granite box ever made is the one found beneath Mastaba 17 at Meidum, attributed to the 3rd dynasty of the Old Kingdom. And it's still a 13-ton precision-carved megalith. From zero to perfection in the deep sands of time, with no precursive technological progression required at all, it seems. Yet, many centuries and dynasties later, we can find boxes, or rather actual sarcophagi, that are clearly handmade and far inferior to older examples. Even with the stone statues, this same argument can be made. Amazing pieces like Khafre Enthroned, carved from diorite, and several others just like it found at Giza, are attributed to the early dynasties of the Old Kingdom. Now, before the mainstream apologists or my wonderful critics have another conniption about my words, I am of course aware that many precision-made boxes, statues, columns and obelisks are attributed to later periods, to the Middle and New Kingdoms, or even to the Ptolemaic times. The huge single-piece boxes in the Serapeum, for example, or the giant 400-plus ton statues at Luxor Temple, as well as many obelisks, are said to have come from these later periods. However, we must remember that the foundation of this dating, this classification upon which the orthodox story of history is built, comes from the writing, the hieroglyphs that are found on or around such objects. This brings me to another point that I like to make in the face of this so-called conclusive evidence, that the writing on these artifacts is obviously not made with the same technology that formed the artifacts themselves. It is manifestly observable, in many cases, that the writing was added much later, to the point that its crude form could be considered more graffiti and defacement, rather than provenance and inception. What's more, it's been proven incontrovertibly that the kings of ancient Egypt made a practice of inheriting and rebadging, of inscribing their names on older artifacts and on the sites themselves. This isn't disputed by academia, it's been documented by Egyptologists, and I have a whole video on this phenomenon, it's also linked below. We will continue to come back to these points about relabeling and about the crude nature of the glyphs themselves. But when you're looking at the sites and artifacts in this video, ask yourself, is it possible that some of the artifacts could have been inherited, claimed, written on, and perhaps even entire temples constructed around them? After many trips to Egypt and a lot of observation, I absolutely think that this is a possibility for what we see. So let's get into a few of the defining characteristics that I believe set some of these statues apart. And in fact, this first one is the real reason I wanted to make this video. It's the proliferation of ancient statues of truly colossal size. Most people might have heard of a couple of these, the Colossi of Memnon for example, but it turns out that those are but on the smaller end of these statues that once existed in ancient Egypt. There were quite a few single-piece statues much larger than the Colossi, in the 1,000 plus ton and above range. Perhaps the best example we have today is the remnants of the enormous seated statue that once stood at the site known as the Ramesseum on the west bank of the Nile near Luxor. It's a relatively small site that isn't as well known or visited as the nearby Valley of the Kings, but what you can see here is entirely worth the stop on any trip to Egypt. The huge granite remains of a seated figure's head and shoulders lie toppled over and broken, next to the enormous pedestal that it originally sat on, also a monolith of granite. Pieces of the feet are still on the pedestal, and other chunks of the statue are scattered around the site. When whole, it was estimated to have weighed in the range of approximately 1,000 tons. The surface of the original granite is still smooth and well polished. I always find this to be an astonishing aspect of megalithic granite work. You can see the very large quartz crystal inclusions in the stone, and all of the other material that makes up granite, all of which are of different hardnesses, making the achievement of such a smooth and well-polished finish utterly remarkable. We can also observe the fine details, the lines and lack of tooling marks on the stripes on the headdress, or in this small part of the ear canal, and contrast those to the relatively rough work and chisel marks of the hieroglyphs that have been made into the statue. Once again, we can observe a notable difference in technology between the writing and that of the object itself. The glyphs are deeply carved into the statue and into the pedestal, a very common practice by the workmen of Ramses II, whom to, of course, this statue is attributed. Ramses was a notorious usurper of older monuments, and he had his name carved deeply into many objects in order for it to be very difficult to remove by his descendants, something that he did on the regular to older work that was inherited. The Ramesseum temple itself was constructed, or at least rebuilt from ruins, by Ramses II, and I contend that it was likely to have been built around the pre-existing Colossus, as well as several other statues and artifacts that still remain on the site. The Ramesseum is a great example of the different levels of technology that can be observed at many temples, kind of like a microcosm of what you can find at the larger sites of Karnak or Luxor. Around the remnants of the great statue are sandstone pylons, columns, and other statues, all made up from multiple stacked blocks, none of them from single pieces, and they've been beautifully carved and decorated with stories of the triumphs of Ramses II. We can also find other large single-piece granite, basalt or granodiorite statues here, with some remnants still standing and remarkable in their form. The head of one of these statues has incredible polished surfaces, like the inside of the ear, with other surfaces being rougher in order to have originally held gold leaf. What a sight it must have been in its glory.
As I told you, because this had a gold leaf on top of it. That's why they keep the truck, so that the gold leaf can stay or stick. Same like all these lower lines, they are not as polished as this because of the gold leaf. And then how you get parts like this polished?
Yeah, inside the ear.
Yeah, inside like this. Very hard. Also, you can realize that they made the eyes, exactly, they made the eyes looking down like this because this was a colossal statue. So when you look, the statue will be looking at you. It's not going to be the statue looking up just like this, no. You will be looking and then the statue will be looking.
That'd be pretty.
Looks like you had something here.
Maybe.
Sorry.
I've had the chance to fly over this site a couple of times in hot air balloons, which gives a wonderful perspective of the many ancient sites and temples in this area. So, as I share with you footage from these flights and from the Ramesseum, let's briefly discuss why I think these colossal statues represent a form of ancient technology. It's well established that with ancient and primitive methods, large loads can be moved, and I don't dispute that this was done by the ancient Egyptians. 50, 100, even 150 or perhaps 200 tons might have been possible to move with the very primitive techniques that the dynastic Egyptians were documented as using, at least out in the open over more or less level ground. They were not known to have used pulleys or capstans, or even livestock, but instead used wooden sleds, levers, ropes, and pure human horsepower to maneuver large loads. Where we start to run into problems, I think, is when we start getting to the 400, 600, or even 1,000 tons and more single-piece artifacts, and I remain entirely skeptical that primitive methods are sufficient to move such loads. I discussed this further in my video on quarrying and logistics. I'd recommend checking that out if you haven't seen it already. But it's not like the level of difficulty goes up in a linear fashion as mass increases. It becomes logarithmically, if not exponentially, more difficult. As load increases, you have to deal with material failure. Wood ceases to be sufficient, and then there is sinkage into the ground and many other issues that arise as the weight goes up to these levels. You just have to look at the lengths that we need to go to in our civilization in order to move loads of these sizes. And nobody, to my knowledge, has ever demonstrated nor sufficiently made the case that these simple techniques and materials of the ancient Egyptians were capable of feats like these. 150 tons? Sure. But 600, 800, or over 1,000 tons? I don't think so. This isn't a case of personal incredulity. There are many engineers and experts who have weighed in on this topic over time. While there have been some theories presented, none of them without their issues, there remains an utter lack of convincing evidence to support any of them. Let's take a quick look at the evidence which every person or mainstream debunker who's ever asserted that they could in fact move giant statues or 1,000-ton loads points to. A wall painting from the tomb of Djehuti-Hotep, dated to around 1880 BCE, the Middle Kingdom of ancient Egypt. This scene depicts a team of workers moving a seated statue on a wooden sled, and this is more or less the proof that is always cited, showing that the dynastic Egyptians had no problem doing this sort of work, and victory against the crazy internet conspiracy theorists is declared shortly thereafter. But let's dig just a little deeper, because, as I think I've shown in my other documentaries about Egyptian stone cutting or tubular drills, the devil is in the details. The statue in question here is not, in fact, carved from granite, but rather from alabaster, both a much softer and less dense material. Various estimates from experts have the statue weighing in at somewhere around 58 to 65 tons. And the scene depicts 172 workers either pulling or pushing. Opinions are divided on this, as pulling would mechanically work better with the workers going backwards. Think of a tug-of-war. And there is another chap pouring a lubricant, likely water, in front of the sled. There was an interesting paper written by Simon Arignac for the Japanese Society of Tribalists in 2015 that discusses the physics and mechanics of the transportation of this statue in some depth. It's worth reading if you're interested in more detail. But the takeaway from it, for me, and I think for anyone who uses a bit of logic, is that this depiction of 172 workers moving a 56-ton statue does nothing to explain how loads of 1,000 tons or more were moved. This method just does not scale up to that degree. The friction coefficient alone of a sled with 1,000 tons onto it digging into the ground, or as might be more likely being smashed into bits, makes this method entirely untenable. I think it's also ridiculous to assume that this method is the one used for long distances, which were absolutely required. In the example of the Russian Thunderstone discussed in my logistics video, they used large gauge steel rail tracks and huge steel ball bearings, along with capstans, to very slowly move the load across a prepared area of ground. So far as I know, no one has yet discovered evidence for an ancient Egyptian steel railway system or the use of steel ball bearings or even capstans. Let's also consider another not inconsequential step here, that the statue at the Ramesseum had to be lifted up and placed onto its pedestal, itself a monumental block of granite. Now, as large as the remnants of this statue at the Ramesseum are, there is evidence for a couple of statues that were considerably larger. The first one I want to mention is one that I dedicated a video to in the past, but which I've since had the opportunity to visit again. The astonishing foot found at the site of Tanis in the northern Egypt in the Delta.
That's all. So this is another way. There used to be huge statues. But look at the size of that foot. And also in the back, this is not the end. Because they also shaped the rest of it here.
Sorry,
So this was a foot. Yeah, it will be a little bit bigger from here and a little bit bigger from there. Now compare this to that huge statue over here, or this one. Look at the size of the foot. And look at the size of the statue. So if this was the size of the foot here, how large would that statue be? You know what I mean? Can you imagine?
Bigger than any of them here.
Exactly.
So
Bigger, as huge as
bigger.
or bigger.
At least Petrie calculated it to be roughly like 100 feet tall. Think of this, the size of a seated statue of this size would have been like think of the ones at Luxor are about 60 feet high, so another 40 feet. It's but then the other
So it would be bigger than the 1,000 ton statue.
yeah.
The thing is, still the challenge, the 1,000 ton statue is 350 kilometers from Aswan. Here was like 1,500 kilometers from Aswan.
Yeah, the block would have been gigantic, like 1,500, 2,000 tons.
Was this secondary?
Yeah,
Yeah, all this part here
carved off to use as a block.
was prepared for using it as a block. It was probably standing on the side like that, or on that side. It was not
It may have been the size of the.
compare it to the human size.
Its foot is about the same size as the foot of the Statue of Liberty. So without the pedestal, it would have maybe been as high as the Statue of Liberty, just the lady. Yeah.
This granite foot, complete with toes, which was later cut and repurposed to be but a block in a wall along with other pieces from repurposed obelisks and the like, is some 700 miles, over 1,100 kilometers from its original quarry in the south. As I detailed in my video, the original single-piece statue that it was part of would have easily exceeded 1,000 tons, and would have been roughly the same dimensions as the Statue of Liberty, just made from solid granite, transported over 700 miles. No biggie for a few workers and a wooden sled, I suppose. When I made that video, I had thought that the foot was evidence for possibly the largest single-piece stone statue, not only from ancient Egypt, but ever made. Recent explorations at Karnak Temple, however, have revealed remains from what might have been an even larger statue. And what's more, it seems to have been made from an even harder and more difficult to work stone, conglomerate quartzite. Pieces of this statue are scattered all around the megalithic boneyards of Karnak, but the most impressive piece is undoubtedly this hand. You can see the darker coloration of the stone. That is flint, which is the material ancient Egyptians used to cut granite. Yet here it is, not only cut but smoothed and polished and finished and furnished with amazingly fine detail, like the thumbnail. From my reckoning, the thumbnail is of a similar size to the toenail of the mighty statue at Tanis, which would make this statue potentially even larger. I'd wager possibly 1,200 tons or more. Once again, of course, we can observe the cartouche of Ramses II carved into the end of the object that the hand is holding. And once again, we can compare the significant difference in the carving of the glyphs, which are quite rough with chisel marks and they're unpolished, against the remarkably fine detail of the thumbnail with no tooling marks and entirely smooth and polished. Once again, I'm left with the distinct impression that the writing very likely came much later. What a sight this statue must once have been. Sadly today, like so much else, it has been reduced to fragments and ruins.
Or just scale up, right? And this is quartzite, composite or conglomerate quartzite. Yeah, right, sorry. You go for it. It's another piece. These are all pieces of it, look. This is all composite quartzite.
We don't know. It could be scrolls. Scrolls, they say it's scrolls. They say it's a piece of cloth. They say it's a scroll with magic power. They say it, but nobody really knows. Now, as a stone carver, and this is quartzite, conglomerate quartzite, as you can see the flints in it. So it's between 7 and 8.5 on the Mohs scale. As a stone carver, I can notice things like the details that is around the cuticle here is amazing. It's the same smoothness. And it's as close as the small details that we find in the inscriptions here that dates and relates the statue. The question that I will always ask as a stone carver, why they didn't use the same tools and polishing that they used here to finish the work around the inscriptions here if they both were made at the same time. Some academics can say that the inscriptions was done by a different person than the carving. I can agree with that, no problem. Still, these two stone workers must have similar tools. Like at least I will be very careful with the inscriptions, as good as the details. So you can see here, look at the finishing in here, at the cuticle of the skin here, huh? And at the nails, and over here, all these sharp details. And look here, this is also
You can do it! Do it!
rough in the inside.
The edgings are soft.
Huh?
This.
The edge is part of the original.
Yeah, so it wasn't like he was holding a hammer or something.
No.
Cut it off. Yeah, it was like this.
It was like that. They just laid the inscriptions on top of it.
Big ring.
Look at the content of flints in this.
Naturally, we can't have a list of massive statues without mentioning the nearby Colossi of Memnon. Also made from quartzite and originally single solid pieces, they were reconstructed originally by the Romans. They weigh in around the 650-ton mark each, and once guarded the gates of a mighty temple even larger than Karnak, which is entirely gone today. Other very large statues have recently been unearthed and stood up in recent years, very close to the Colossi, likely part of the same temple complex that I got a view of from hot air balloon flights over the West Bank. Although this video is focused on the statues, when we're talking about 1,000 tons or even heavier loads, there's a couple of honourable mentions. The great unfinished granite obelisk at Aswan, for example, something I dedicated a recent video to, is in the 1,200 ton range. There are also a pair of other lesser well-known unfinished blocks in a limestone quarry near Minya in Egypt. One of them has the outline of a colossal standing statue on it. Using rough dimensions and the average density of the weight of limestone in the Minya region, these two blocks have been estimated to weigh approximately a staggering 3,500 and 5,000 tons respectively. Further afield, there are several examples of massive quarried and finished stones that you can find at Baalbek in Lebanon. Recently, a supporter and friend, Mark Winden, a professional cinematographer, visited the site of the Roman Temple of Jupiter and shared with me his spectacular footage. Stick around to the end of this video and my postscript if you'd like to see a little more of this site, but it will definitely be the subject of a future video. The mighty trilithon stones, 3 blocks lifted and perfectly fitted together, weigh in at around 900 tons each. They form part of the foundation wall at Baalbek, upon which the Romans, much later, in my estimation, built their pedestal and magnificent temple to Jupiter. In the nearby quarry of Baalbek rests the famous Stone of the Pregnant Woman, at
Zeus,
least
right? Jupiter was
1,000
Zeus.
tons. Excavations in recent years have revealed another and even larger quarried stone
That one
beneath
girl
and beside it,
dipped.
estimated to be around 1,500 tons. It's unlikely that the Romans even knew this stone was here during their time. Returning to Egypt, the most well-preserved large statues are those found on the other side of the Nile from the Colossi at Luxor Temple. Several of these awe-inspiring statues have been reconstructed in modern times and make for spectacular viewing under lights in the evening. While not as large as our previous examples, the fact that they're mostly intact has allowed some limited investigation into other aspects of their construction, ones that I consider to be some of the very best evidence for a form of lost ancient technology. I'm referring here to the precision and symmetry that has been observed in these statues through the work of engineer Christopher Dunn. I've covered these aspects of the statues in detail in my documentary on the precision of ancient Egyptian works, so I'd recommend checking that out if you haven't seen it. In summary, the utter perfection in the symmetry of the granite heads and crowns or headsets puts these accomplishments far outside the reach of any primitive hand-carved methods. What's even more remarkable is that the faces of these statues are all the same. In fact, many of the statues that display such precision or other signs of lost technology also have the same exact features and face, and their attribution spreads across vastly different time periods, from the early dynasties of the Old Kingdom, like the famous Khafre and throne statue, to those said to be Ramses II himself, who ruled in the 19th dynasty. To me, it's suggestive of some form of template that the original builders, who I think might well be responsible for all statues of this type, were working from.
Here we can see again the name of Merimnatep down here and between the legs, and the name of Ramses II here.
There are two
The
different sets of
statue
names.
doesn't look like any of them.
Nah,
And we have the name of Ramses, of course, again over
the dagger.
the dagger. Another thing we can notice is that the belt in this case looks like it was, something was removed and then it was carved into it.
Once again, when you visit Luxor Temple, you can observe some of the significant disparities between the writing that's been chiseled into the statues versus the details and finish of the statues themselves. It's worlds apart. Some of the best evidence that the writing came later can be found on the belts of several upright statues. In places, they have quite obviously been carved over pre-existing features, like the dagger.
But anyway, that big, or whatever it is, we can see here that the name came on top of it. The name of Ramses II is on the top of the carving and on top of the kilt itself. While here they don't do it because the shape that looks like a dagger is in the middle. So they didn't bother carving it on it, but here they didn't. Huh?
You see that?
Go to the belts. Tomorrow, when we go to Karnak, I will show you.
You can, you see the hieroglyph on the belt line?
Yeah. Yes.
So how the dagger's kind of in the middle. If you look at those two statues here on the left, the daggers are slightly off-center in the middle, and you can pretty clearly see how the hieroglyph's been added over the carving of the dagger. See the corner of the ankh, the shen ring? You know what I mean?
I think the belt buckle itself was maybe that shape, but then they just put hieroglyphs inside.
I think they probably added the whole
Just the
Shenring
whole
inside
thing.
it. Yeah,
So the belt was just a clean.
Yeah, they've added it there. This one here has the name of a couple different pharaohs on it. It has you can see the Ramses this there, right? That's Ramses the Great.
The one on the left there.
Yeah, on the left in the Shenring, and then it's Meren Ptah between the legs, his son. They both put their names on it, and then Ramses again up top there.
There are many other statues like this also at Karnak Temple, and in one place we can find a piece from a statue that had yet to be rebadged. As my friend Yusuf Ayman explains, the dynastic Egyptians understood how to integrate their writing into the older statues.
Here we found again, this is part of a statue as you can see, and here is the belt with no name. Yeah, we added this.
Yeah, the objects themselves.
They are smart enough to choose focal points where the inscriptions will fit with the statue or with the structure and look from as all of them are from the same part.
At Karnak and Luxor temples, we can observe again the tale of two industries. Surrounding these single-piece granite artifacts, be they obelisks, statues or architecture, we can find the dynastic work wrought from stacked blocks of sandstone. Huge pylons, massive and spectacular hyper-style halls and columns, made in the image and style of the older examples. It seems eminently possible that these temples, undoubtedly work of the dynastic Egyptians, could have been built up around pre-existing monuments. In fact, at Luxor, the offset and uneven nature of the columns and statues might indicate that they didn't even move the statues, but rather built up columns around them. At Karnak, there is an excellent example of pre-existing older and lower layers of infrastructure. In the great hyperstyle hall built from sandstone, underneath some missing floor tiles, we can find the base for what must have been a much older column, one that would have been covered up when the later temple was constructed. This column base is made from white calcite, and many of these bases can be found on old kingdom sites, thought to support single-piece granite columns. Perhaps this structure was already in ruins when kings like Ramses II decided to have it covered over and rebuilt. But whatever the case, it does seem clear that the original structure and artifacts at Karnak go back much further in time than the 19th dynasty it's mostly attributed to.
And another
Holy shit, I am fucking trolling them, bro.
probably the other one resonating with this one over there. If this is related to the Middle Kingdom, why is Hatshepsut has her obelisk here? You can just see layers on top of layers. And when we, as Egyptologists, divide the site to timelines, we depend on inscriptions. But we already know that inscriptions can be added in different.
The granite columns should be the subject of their own video, and they will be, but we do have examples in the Egyptian Museum that come from Old Kingdom sites like Saqqara and Giza or Abu Sir, that with their tapering granite form show remarkable precision and craftsmanship in their construction. I do want to quickly mention here also the site of Abu Simbel, which I had the chance to visit for the first time only recently. While not single-piece statues, these giant figures of Ramses II have been carved directly out of the sandstone hillside. When Egypt constructed the Great Dam on the Nile River, creating the vast Lake Nasser, it would have flooded the original location for Abu Simbel. So a massive project was undertaken to carefully cut up the temple into blocks and move it a short distance uphill for reconstruction. Quite a difficult task, and I have to say it was one amazingly well done. I do have to wonder though, if the dynastic Egyptians apparently found it so easy to move huge loads around, why did we in modern times have to cut it up into so many smaller blocks in order to get the job done? The huge carvings are undeniably impressive, but I don't put them in the same technological category of the granite works that we've discussed so far. They're carved from sandstone, which, as we've said, is much softer than granite, and there was never any need to move them. Scaffolding, an army of artisans, and time could get the job done. A closer inspection shows that they don't seem to exhibit the same perfectness in proportion or features that we can observe in many granite statues. The work here seems just a little bit rough, both outside and inside the temple, and undoubtedly it's the result of carving with hand tools. This doesn't take anything away from the achievement. It's an incredible sight, well worth the long drive to visit. But it's just not the same thing as a 1,000+ ton single-piece granite statue that's been quarried, carved with precision, and moved hundreds of miles. In this video, so far we've covered the characteristics of these statues that I think sets them apart from the work and capabilities of the dynastic Egyptians. There is one last category that I want to briefly discuss, and that is the evidence for some form of power tool being used. The signs of these tools are quite rare, as all tool marks have generally been polished out, but in a few places we can find overcuts into granite or diorite, or the evidence for tubular drills, like between the feet here, probably used to remove material in the roughing out process. The examples of overcuts that we can see on the seat or under the armpits of statues in the Egyptian Museum are all from Old Kingdom sites like Giza. I consider these to be minor mistakes in their construction, small overcuts when the material was being shaped. Let me be clear about this. Overcuts like these simply would not happen if the method being used was some form of manual grinding. Overcuts of this depth represent hours and hours of work if they were being ground out with copper and sand. And in particular, the cuts under the armpits are so short, with 2 cuts of different angles in this example, that it rules out the possibility of some form of back and forth grinding with a copper bar. Look at the angles, and look at the depth of the armpit. There just isn't any room for that. And as a reminder, grinding with sand and copper bars is the only explanation mainstream Egyptology offers for the tooling marks that we observe, made into very hard stone. It's also the only explanation they offer for how the tens of thousands of granite and basalt blocks were cut in the first place. Despite this, not a single copper bar or drag saw has ever been discovered. The "where are the tools" argument applies equally well to the orthodox explanation, as much as it might to any so-called alternative proposal. What's more, this copper bar grinding on sand explanation just doesn't hold any water when compared to the many ancient examples of circular or straight saw tool marks, evidence that I examine in depth in my video on ancient Egyptian stone cutting, linked below. On these very same Old Kingdom statues, in the Egyptian Museum, we can, once more, observe the crudeness of the hieroglyphs, their imperfect lines, chisel marks, and unpolished finish. Contrast those against the perfect nature of the lotus flower motif on the side of the statue, or the perfect finish of the statues themselves. Remember that it is this writing that Egyptology uses to date and relate the statue into the story of history. To me, it couldn't be any more obvious that the writing came after and has nothing to do with the technology used to create the statue itself. So, before I wrap this video up, I'd like to spend a few minutes laying out my explanation for what we can see, what I think the possibilities are. If some of these statues, along with other artifacts and architecture, those which display the characteristics of advanced forms of technology, are in fact older and were inherited, what conclusions might we draw? It's nothing new to regular viewers of this channel that I, as well as many others, contend that there is strong evidence for a lost pre-cataclysmic civilization on this planet. I've delved into this evidence in many videos: the world-changing cataclysm of the Younger Dryas, the extension of the human timeline through both human fossil finds and DNA evidence, discoveries like Göbekli Tepe pushing back the origins of known civilization, and the tremendous weight of the technological aspects of machining and precision, along with the many contradictions in the established story of history. While I do contend that there is a functional purpose for many of the artifacts we've explored on this channel, the boxes, the slabs, the obelisks, and large bowls, in some cases the very sites themselves, with their combination of stone types and infrastructures of channeled blocks and piping running beneath the floors, we really can't say the same thing about the statues. I don't think there's any argument to be made that there is a functional purpose for them. As with any great statue from any civilization throughout time, their nature is artistic and representational. They certainly seem to have benefited from the same precision manufacturing processes used for many of the other artifacts, a capability created, I believe, in the pursuit of function. I often get the question, if the statues are so ancient, then why do they look like dynastic Egyptians? Well, I rather think it's the other way around. A cargo cult is more or less defined as a primitive or indigenous culture who, through one manner or the other, finds or inherits objects or artifacts, perhaps even stories, that represent technology beyond their own understanding, who then use ritual or ceremony to try and make that technology come back to life. There have been many documented occurrences of cargo cults throughout history. Some of you who are as old as I am might remember a movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy, which aptly, if abstractly, demonstrates some of these principles. In this scenario, one of inheritance and longer timelines, the Egyptian civilization is far more than simply a cargo cult. They are undeniably connected to their ancestors, and they tell us this themselves with their king's list and description of the times of Zep Tepi, when the gods themselves walked the earth, followed by the rulers known as the Shemsu Horde, in a timeline that stretches back some 35,000 years. Cataclysm most likely ended any civilization that existed during these times, blasting the human survivors back into a hunter-gatherer existence for millennia. As time passed and human populations headed towards organised civilization once again, dynastic Egypt might well have been bootstrapped into existence with legends, stories, culture, and yes, iconic statues, artifacts, and architecture worshipped as divine. How could you not model your own existence from them? The kings and rulers of dynastic Egypt might have sought to capture some of this godhood, to capture the immortal significance represented by such artwork, and to make themselves a member of the divine. An examination of any of the artwork and carvings on any of the mortuary temples dedicated to such kings shows exactly that. The kings are always placed amongst the gods, interacting with the gods, becoming one of the gods. So it's not so much a case of these statues looking like the dynastic Egyptians, but rather the dynastic civilization itself being modelled from the inherited and iconic remnants of their own past. Even going by the orthodox dating, the stylization of these figures remained consistent down through the millennia, from those said to have come from the earliest times of the Old Kingdom to those attributed to the New Kingdom thousands of years later. These statues were claimed by kings, temples built around them, and in several cases, as has been documented, even labelled with their own names through primitive chiselling with flint tools. It's certainly a hypothesis that bears further investigation, and I can't say that this is exactly what happened, but to me, it's where the evidence points. What's the alternative, though? Through the work of people like Flinders Petrie and later on Christopher Dunn, at this point it's incontrovertible that there was some very advanced stonework techniques applied in ancient times. We have to compare this to the obvious and far more primitive techniques that are also on display. The hand-chiseled rough glyphs, the less perfect statues and architecture, the mud brick pyramids, all of which match the tools and techniques that we have in the archaeological record. So, if my whole hypothesis here is nonsense and dynastic Egypt indeed was responsible for everything, then they had an entirely superior technology available to them, alongside and at the same time as they employed primitive techniques and tools. This also means that they possessed vastly more knowledge about the dimensions of the planet and the motions of the heavens, as evidenced by the endless set of so-called coincidences encoded into architecture like the Great Pyramid. Of course, we have no direct evidence for this advanced knowledge and technology of the dynastic Egyptians, only the architecture left standing, the tool marks left behind, the precision objects themselves, and the logistical achievements of moving 1,000+ ton loads across vast distances. Between these two options, I think the balance of evidence points towards the inheritance model, longer timelines, and a very advanced form of a cargo cult in the dynastic civilization. This in no way takes away from their achievements. They are one of the world's greatest cultures to have ever existed. But in seeking the truth here, we do have to explain the most difficult aspects of the problem. Certainly, we could do with more open-minded research, and once again, I would say that I very much hope that the establishment and authorities with the access and power to do such work might pursue some of these avenues, rather than just concluding that because pounding stones and flint chisels or copper tools and depictions like the Djibouti Hotep image are all we found, then that's how everything was done. If they, are ever looking for ideas on that front about what we could investigate, I've certainly got plenty of them, and it's a discussion I'd love the chance to have. Ultimately, even if it proves everything that I've said here as being wrong, as long as it gets us closer to unraveling the mysteries of our past, it will absolutely have been worth it. Thanks for watching. Well, there it is. I hope you enjoyed that look into the colossal statues, well, really all of the statues of ancient Egypt. If you did enjoy it, please do consider dropping a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. It definitely helps me out a lot. If you're interested in seeing some of these artifacts for yourself, there are still a few spots available on my upcoming October trip to Egypt with Yusuf Awan. That runs from October 6th through the 19th of this year. There's a link to where you can find out more information down below in the description. That trip's going to be part of a very busy next couple of months for me. In September, really only in a couple of weeks here, I'll be in the Channeled Scablands with Kyle and Russ, Brothers of the Serpent, Randall Carlson and his crew from Cosmographia, as well as the Grimerica boys. We're running a couple of tours in the Scablands. It's always a great time, and Randall's an excellent teacher looking at the geographic history of that region and the evidence for all of the Ice Age megafloods. Those trips run from the 19th to the 24th of September, and then from the 26th of September through October 1st. And once again, more information, there's a link down in the description. After that, and then I guess in between Egypt trips for me, I'm also going to be speaking at the Earth Origins 5 conference in Sedona in October this year. That's happening October 28th through the 30th. Randall Carlson's also going to be speaking there, David Matheson, several others, George Howard. And again, if you're interested in attending that or catching a live stream for that event, the link will be below in the description. As always, just want to extend a massive thank you to everybody who does support what I'm doing here and supports my work through that value for value model, whether it comes through PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar, or any of those mechanisms. You guys are really the reason I'm able to spend the time it takes to make and edit and do all these videos. I'm doing my best to keep the whole this video brought to you by VPN product /earbuds /Raid Shadow Legends out of these videos, and so far I'm managing to do that, so thank you everyone for that. I do want to extend a special thank you to a few people, the executive producers and associate executive producers for this episode. If you're interested in supporting my work or understanding what's involved in those programs, they're real credits, those producer credits. They work the same way as any Hollywood credit might. All of the details are on my website. It's unchartedx.com/support. Firstly, just want to go through the executive producers and say thank you to a few people. Sebastian Lundberg, as well as Mark Winden, for their help with some awesome footage that I used in this video. Thanks guys, that has just been, yeah, it's helped me out a lot, and right now you guys are seeing some of the Mark's excellent footage from Baalbek in Lebanon. Jim Dickey, through a combination of things really, Patreon, Twitch. Jim comes in and is a supporter on the Twitch channel. I stream live on Twitch a couple times a week. Thanks Jim, the support is much appreciated. Frank Lindberg, who sent in support via check. Frank, thank you so much for the check, the support, and for the kind note that you sent me. It's much appreciated. Drew Stearns is also a executive producer for this episode. Thank you, Drew. He sent in some support through PayPal. It is very much appreciated. And then also Toft, who is somebody who's hit me up with various tips over the last couple of years through Subscribestar. So I just wanted to say thank you for all of that support, Toft, through that Subscribestar platform. It is much appreciated. And then for associate executive producers for this episode, we only have one at this time. It's Ben Atwell, who hit me up through PayPal with support and a very kind note. Ben, thank you very much for the support, mate. All right, well, I do hope you all found that interesting, and I hope everybody out there as well, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.
Steyne Moor, Northern England. A land of open skies, desolate hills, ruins of the old world. It's had many names over the years, many people. In the mid-10th century, the winds of political change in Northumbria at his back, the last Norse ruler of Jorvik, Eric Bloodaxe, made a last-ditch effort to cross this moor, accompanied by his
This is the Lockpicking Lawyer, and just because you can get into something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. At least, that's the specific advice that comes to mind today. You see, what I have for you today is something that many women consider to be the epicenter of their most intimate moments and thoughts. These go by several names, which range from clinical to downright inappropriate, but looking at these, I think we'll use the term kitty for obvious reasons. I have 3 kitties to show you. This one belongs to Mrs. Lockpicking Lawyer, and you'll notice it's a nice rosy pink and quite furry. You can't tell this on video, but it also has a nice watermelon
This
scent
motherfucker,
to it.
bro.
This one
Telling
belongs
this
to a
chick, shave that
neighbor of
shit,
mine,
bro. What
a
the
very
fuck?
friendly girl who works
I'm
as a
balling on
nurse.
YouTube. What are you doing,
You'll notice
woman?
her kitty is even more furry than my wife's, but she's also decorated it with glitter. That's quite unusual. In my experience, you'll either find kitties that are furry or kitties decorated with glitter. Finding both together is rare, though I've heard it was a bit more popular back in the 70s. Even so, I understand this kitty is quite well used, so apparently it does have some appeal. This last kitty belongs to my ex-girlfriend, and unlike the first 2, this one is perfectly smooth on the outside. I understand that's becoming more popular these days. Also, unlike the first 2, this one is not pink on the outside. However, if we look carefully into these folds, we can clearly see it's pink on the inside. That pink coloration on the inside is
come on, give me a one defender, guys.
If we look into my
What
wife's
the
kitty, we
fuck?
can certainly see some pink in there. And moving over to my neighbor's kitty, well, that one's more of a purple color. I've never seen that, but I've heard that can happen with excessive use. Now, only a few people will ever get inside of any particular woman's kitty, and that's because they're kept closed unless you first get into their hearts. Now, I of course have the key to my wife's heart, so getting into her kitty is fairly routine. I do it often, and it usually doesn't take more than a few seconds, though my wife does seem to prefer when I take my time. That said, when I first met my wife, I did not have a key and found getting in quite difficult. I had to figure out exactly where to touch and how to manipulate to get in. If I recall correctly, I spent a fair bit of time with my tool in this hole. Strangely, it did nothing at all, but when I squeezed my tool into this tiny little crevice, it seemed to pop right open. So that's what I've been doing ever since. Similarly, my ex-girlfriend's kitty is also kept tightly shut unless you first find your way into her heart. I'm not sure if I remember exactly how to do it, but let's give it a try. I put my tool into this tight little hole at the bottom. And there we go. It took a little bit more time than it used to, but I suspect with some practice, I could be getting into this kitty fairly regularly. Okay, moving on to the kitty decorated with glitter. You'll notice that this one is not guarded by an owner's heart. When I first encountered a glittered kitty, I have to admit I tried carefully to get in and something worked. However, I noticed something strange that might help you if you ever run into a glittered kitty. When I put away my normal kitty and took out it opened up surprisingly fast. I still haven't figured out why that is, but let's give it a shot.
Fucking unite, goat. Shit.
Okay, as you can see, we got into that very quickly using some gold. One additional note, you'll notice that when I get into a kitty covered in glitter, always make sure that your tool is covered in rubber. Now, having shown you a few kitties belonging to women, the question arises, do men have something similar? Well, in fact they do, but they don't quite fit in on this channel because unlike women's kitties, the male equivalent of extraordinarily easy to access. I actually borrowed a few from friends of mine to show you. You'll notice there's nothing stopping you from accessing any of them. I'm not sure why they're so different. One curious observation I had, though, is they're all about the same size, roughly 6 inches. I find that strange because comparing it to mine's about 8 inches. I always thought that was normal. I guess not. In any case, that's all I have for you today. If you do have any questions or comments about this, put them below. If you like this video and would like to see more like it,
Dude, attack!
have a great day.
Oh, I guess. Okay, I'm with it.
This is the Lockpicking Lawyer, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. Now, in the past, I've noted that effective pick practice requires a person to vary what they pick. In fact, that's the philosophy that gave birth to the Covert Instruments Practice Lock, which can be used with a pin, and the Locksport Trainer, which includes several cylinders. My personal training sets are far more specialized. What do I mean? Well, this set that I put together a year or two ago was specifically picked up for using a short hook, the SC1 E-Way. That's one of the most common grabs. As you might imagine, the set is full of the picking scenarios that I find hardest. Extreme bidding, zero lift pins, easily overset pins. In fact, some of these locks have bidding so extreme that it is nearly impossible to pick them with a short hook without either switching pick direction, which changes the binding order, or artificially altering the binding order by varying tension. Other cylinders in here can be picked without setting the pin, and relax the tension to let them drop that pin. This is all about bidding and maneuvering in the freeway. There are no security pins in here, but these are about as hard as you can get with standard pin. Bottom line, this is that I'm going to challenge me, at least while using a short hook. So, sit back and relax. This is probably going to take a while, and I'm not going to say much, but you will get a very good idea of what I do, usually multiple times a day, with different sets that I have to maintain my skills. So, I'm going to take out a vise, set that up under the camera, and go ahead. A really high cut number 6 that was difficult to get
Oh fuck, what a whiff! What a whiff! What a fucking whiff and a half, this motherfucker! Oh my god, just press the button, bro! On my way to Hammy!
Set number 2. Release tension to let that down.
Fuck. Fuck. Bad time to die, Wheezy. Bad fucking time to die. Oh, bad time for them to try to score that. Bad time for them to try to score that. Wow. 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 Thank you, team. Oh no, they got it! But they're too dead. They can't. They're not gonna. They could probably. No, hell no. Hell no.
There we go. I think that one was a 0 cut coming back.
What a goal! Don't give up!
Try that again. I release tension.
Fuck. We lost.
There we go. 5 was extremely low cut. Right behind it is a very high cut, which means I probably overset number 5.
Time's up.
Mierda. ¿Cómo se van a pelear ahí? Se mueren antes del minuto 2-5, animales de mierda.
Mierda. Llévame y venga, mierda. Llévate, pendejo. Now you use your mic. At the end of the fucking match, bro. The end of the fucking match, you use your fucking mic, bro.
There we go. That was in combination with a 0 cut pin in slot 4. Or I should say a 0 lift pin, not 0 cut. Okay, number 3 I definitely overset just now.
I like that, the other one where he was talking the most. It's so funny. What is that? What is that? The truth about Christianity's origin. Don't care.
That just now.
I like that, the other one where he was talking the most.
That just now.
I like that, the other one where he was talking.
See you later. My dad's like, hold up. So what's been going on? So how are the tanks? And he spends like an hour, not an hour, like 40 minutes talking to this dude about tanks and guns and military stuff, to the point to where the people that were working there came to our table and were like, you have to leave. We're closed. Get out. And my dad ate a sandwich in the fucking car. But yeah, he was talking about a lot. It was funny.
I can't
That was
remember
yesterday.
either.
We didn't tip though.
Tipping culture has gotten out of control. I get up to the pay window and she's like, how much do you want to tip? What am I gonna tip you for? I'm in the drive-thru. Oh my God.
Tips have been on the rise for decades. During the 1950s, people commonly tipped 10% of the bill. By the 1970s and 1980s, that jumped to 15%.
Jesus.
Today, people tip anywhere from 15 to 25%.
That is crazy.
According to one 2020.
I mean, for me, here's what I do, right? Is like, I'm fucking rich. I just hit the biggest number. I'll always tip them a bunch of money because I don't care. I don't give a fuck, it's whatever. However, nobody should ever have to tip for anything. Do not engage in a financial contract with an employer if the employer is not giving you adequate wages. Nobody should ever have to tip. Do not let anybody ever, some fucking upper middle class loser, tell you that if you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to eat out. Fuck that. If you want to go out and you want to get yourself a nice meal and you don't have the money to tip, do it and enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Survey, consumers said they tipped more than 21% on average.
Yep.
Nowadays,
I used to never tip. Like, never. I would never tip for anything.
There are people who argue 20% is kind of a cheap tip.
While the percentage that consumers are tipping at full-service restaurants in the past couple of years has remained about the same, in the fourth quarter of 2022, the number of tips provided at full-service restaurants grew 17%. Meanwhile, the tip frequency...
I think, like, I mean, really, that's probably because of, like, COVID, because people have the mindset, well, like, if you're out here dying just to make sure I have a taco, yeah, I can slide you another $1. It's fine. Not a big deal. So I think that's what happened.
Quick service restaurants, such as coffee shops and fast food chains, rose 16% during the same time period.
What we're seeing now nationwide is something that is known as tipflation. At every opportunity, we're being presented with a tablet that's asking us how much we'd like to tip.
In many cases, not only replacing the old-fashioned tip jars that you could feel good about throwing some spare change into, but actually suggesting tip amounts, often right in front of the employee receiving that tip.
Oh, the worst part is whenever there's not a no tip button, it's just a custom button and you have to enter a 0. Oh, that's so annoying.
Not to mention also your dinner date and the dozen or so people standing behind you in line.
Yeah.
And it's gone beyond just the tablets. The other day I was using the Hopper app to book a hotel, and it wasn't until I confirmed my payment that I realized my hotel was $10 more expensive. It turns out Hopper assumed I wanted to add a tip, and I had to go back to a prior page in order to opt out.
I think that tipping is only bad if it's not included in the payment. Like, for example, I think mandatory, or like for example, if you go out somewhere, how many of you guys have ever been out like to like a really fucking expensive restaurant or like out to a club, and if you're over, I think it's like usually $1,000, it's like a 20% gratuity gets added onto your check. I actually think that's totally fine. Yeah, 4K hotel. No, I'm not talking about 4K hotel. I'm talking about, like, yeah, you spend $1,000. Yeah, that's standard. I actually think that's totally fucking fine because that's established before you spend any money.
Tipflation refers to not just that we're tipping more, but we're tipping everyone for everything.
You're being guilted into tipping on something that is not technically a service. It's someone simply doing their job. In those situations, consumers are feeling...
Well, all of the services are people doing their job because their job is to perform the service. Like whenever a waiter brings you a glass of water or brings you their food, or your food, excuse me, that's their job. If the waiter wasn't giving people their food, they would be out of the building.
Resentful. Where do you draw the line?
Yeah. The problem is that the public is not the problem is that in the US there is such a, it's kind of weird, but like there's usually this isn't the case, but like there's a lot of like people that look down on the people that don't tip as like assholes or bad people or something like that. But what I hope that you have to realize is that the people that don't tip, a lot of the reasons why they don't tip, it's because they don't have any money. They don't have that much money. So like you're effectively, it's like one of the only times in society where it's socially acceptable to look down and shame people for being poor. Yeah, it's unironic poor shaming. So eat at home? Well, why would you eat at home if you could go out and they have the food there? I don't understand. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It's really weird. Yeah, I know. Because you can't tip? Well, why would you... Well, why would you not... Well, I mean, it's not like you have to tip to go inside. I mean, they still give you food if you don't tip. Yeah, what do you mean? Why would you not do that? It doesn't make sense. We have another person in chat, very smart person. Somebody says, what about streamers getting tipped for doing literally bullshit, giving entertainment? Is it on Twitch to pay you? Yes, actually, as a matter of fact, it is on Twitch to pay me. And there are multiple cases of streamers complaining on being not tipped for things, and they've all been shit on. Two examples of those are Invader Vi and also Bad Bunny. So, I understand you think you're smart. You're not. But you think that. Hopefully now you've learned something. You just, it's just not true. It's stupid.
TIP stands for to ensure promptness. Tipping may go back as far as the Roman era, but according to most experts, the practice likely has its origins in medieval Europe.
Noblemen taking passage on roads would throw coins to the rubble to ensure safe passage. One theory is that it evolved in eating and drinking establishments as a way to forestall envy. That when you're eating and drinking, you're having fun, and the people who are serving you are not.
Fast forward to the 19th century, when waiters who received a full wage went on strike demanding higher wages, they were replaced with women who employers could pay less.
There it is, brother. History's repeating itself. Now instead of women, we got Flippy doing it. There we go.
A decade later, there was the population of newly freed slaves. The idea from these restaurant owners was that they were...
How is the foundation of tipping being okay? That, well, we had women as second-class citizens, and then we freed the slaves who were kind of even below that, and so that's how tipping started. It sounds really bad.
Giving the luxury or privilege of a white person's tips.
Oh my
that was
God!
Without a full wage.
Ironically, as tipping exploded in the United States, it became less common in Europe and was replaced with service charges.
While the first federal minimum wage law was passed in 1938, it wasn't until almost 3 decades later when the tip minimum wage was established. In 1991, the federal minimum wage for tipped employees was set at $2.13, which is what it remains at as of March 2023.
That seems like it doesn't keep up. That seems like it's not keeping up with inflation. Man. Let's see how much it would be.
Which was established in 1991.
1991. Okay, so how much would it be now? I did this before. Hopefully we'll do this one right here. Okay, so $2.13.
Now we lost.
And then we're gonna look at, let's just do January of 1991.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up.
$4.76. So it would be almost double.
the federal minimum wage for tipped employees was set at $2.13, which is what it remains at as of March 2023.
As far as I know, the United States is the only country that exempts tipped workers from having to receive the full minimum wage.
Isn't it great? Hell yeah, brother. That's right.
In 43 states, it is legal to pay tipped workers less than the standard minimum wage, because tips presumably make up that difference.
Of course.
In recent years, you might have found yourself asking, do I tip this barista for pouring that hot coffee? What about when I'm
No.
going to a restaurant and picking up takeout?
No.
And how much do I tip that doorman, driver, or dog walker?
No.
When those in the service industry were feeling the brunt during the coronavirus pandemic, consumers started tipping for things they never had before.
Yeah.
And the percentage of remote transactions when tipping was an option in which the consumer tipped soared from about 46% before the pandemic to around 86% in January 2022.
Jesus.
If people were willing to tip the person delivering food to their home 30%, why not ask if they'd like to tip when they come pick up?
During the pandemic, businesses who
Yeah, tip Chipotle for putting your food on the fucking counter for all the takeout food. Yeah, you want to give us $5 extra for putting your food on the counter?
lost a lot of traditional customers and transactions were looking for alternative ways to make up that income. And if asking for tips was one way to do it, they were willing to try it.
And since then, that ask hasn't dissipated. Another reason consumers say they feel pressured to tip more, they're being asked to tip prior to service completion.
Asking for a tip beforehand is almost like a bribe.
Yeah, it is.
Right? I'm afraid not to tip because
you're gonna mess up my
you
food.
do less good work.
Absolutely, that's what they would do. And I see memes about this all the time, which is ironic because that's where they said tipping came from. It was fucking noblemen and like these guys that throw the coins on the ground so nobody will attack them whenever they're trying to cross the bridge. So we've actually come full circle. There you go.
Customers might not be concerned about the barista's perception of their tip before getting their latte, but what about the mechanic repairing your car? I don't know about you, but I'm certainly going to make sure to tip them well to ensure my safety.
People with too much money.
Another reason consumers are tipping more, newer technologies. Kiosks and tablets with 3 large tipping suggestions that pop up on the screen in front of you.
Yeah.
3 options chosen by the business.
I have not yet been to the restaurant where they recommend 5, 10, or 15% for
It's
quick
usually
takeout.
10, 20,
it
or
normally
25.
always starts at 15 as a bare minimum, sometimes even starting at 20, 25, and up to 30.
Really?
According to a 2022 CreditCards.com survey, 22% of respondents said when they're presented with various suggested tip
I mean,
amounts,
that's like a 100% tip. You spend $2, you tip $2. Like, I mean, fuck.
they feel pressured to tip more than they normally would.
Yeah.
They use those options as an
Well, it's social pressure, and if you give in to the social pressure, you lose your fucking money. This is only gonna stop whenever people stop giving into it. But because people are so fucking desperate for approval, then they don't stop doing it. People could get rid of tipping culture overnight. If everybody just decided to stop tipping at certain places, it would go away. But they don't do it because they're too afraid of the social consequence. That's what it is. They're fucking slaves to approval.
indication of kind of what the normative range is and feel compelled to tip within that range. So the more you ask, the more you get.
Yeah, of course.
The 3 prominent companies with that trendy, sleek look are Square, Toast, and Clover. They launched a bit more than a decade ago to help businesses run smarter, faster, and easier, all in one point-of-sale or POS systems. In some cases, fewer fees so it's less of a burden to accept multiple credit cards, no long-term contracts, and multiple other useful tools, including inventory and employee management.
Sure.
They've got credit card processing into the hands of individuals and very small merchants. Square did a great job, and it's been a tremendous growth story. That's half of the business today.
Do you think these companies are responsible for this turn of events that we've seen with tipping?
I would say they could take some of the credit for
No, it's not the company's fault. You can't blame somebody for saying, hey, do you want to give me $5? And you're like, yeah, okay. Hey, how about 10? You want to give me $10? And you're like, okay, I guess. And then now it's their fault for asking you for 15? No, it's the customer.
Dive on that nigga. Dive on them, bro.
It's the customer's fault because they put up with it.
Restaurants gather more tips.
Robert Sanchez manages Eli's Essentials in New York City. One of the business's locations uses Toast, while the other uses this. He says the storefront that uses Toast sees more and higher tips.
The Clover, Square, and Toast terminals to a consumer are very easy to use. Big buttons, big areas to sign the tip.
Oh, yeah.
An easy way to tip a different amount if you don't like the starting at 20% option. There are others.
Oh yeah, they have this one at Sonic. Like Sonic, not Sonic the Hedgehog, the fucking hot dog place. And like I click the no tip button and it doesn't do anything. Yeah, it doesn't do anything. There's like nothing that happens at all. It's just crazy, man. Sonic is dead. Yeah, it's like you click on it and it doesn't finish the transaction. It just acts like you didn't hit a button, so maybe you hit the tip button after that.
That do it, they're just not as cool looking.
We've come a long way from being able to just throw your spare change into the jar by the cash register.
The new tablets have turned what used to be a sin of omission. I simply didn't put money into the tip jar into a sin of commission. I have to hit a button and say no tip. I have to actively choose not to tip. Whereas before, not tipping was a kind of a passive thing.
Glancing at the tip jar could have also been a way to get a sense of how many others are tipping on that service and maybe even how much money. Meanwhile, not only can the tipping options be customized, but the tipping feature can be disabled as well. So, it's the merchant's choice to ask or not to ask for tips.
You can't blame them for asking. Like, I don't think you should blame them for asking. I think that's ridiculous. I think that people need to be held accountable for their own actions. At a certain point, you can't blame people for seeking money and trying to get a tip for something. Like, how is it that, like, you're doing something? How is it not the... I really hate this because it's like... This is like... So it's their fault? Like, the world needs to change because you feel insecure about not tipping? This is the weirdest, like... What the fuck is this? It's so obnoxious, man. There's no need to get tip. I don't get it. Like, it's just that they... Fuck. You're just, what's this here? You're just wrong? Wait, no, I'm not. Classic Asmon arguing for the exploiter. I'm not arguing for the exploiter. What I'm saying is that, like, there's such a massive spectrum of this that you can never actually have any legislation or any ruling on this that was going to make any sense. Because you can look at tipping as a million different things. So for a million different services, because a lot of things that people do are services. It's impossible to, like, really draw a line anywhere. It's up to the individual to draw their own line.
Business side, it makes employees want to perform better and do a better job.
It's seriously significant.
They get more
really
money.
pays for the software. You'd be a foolish business owner not to install it based on what the numbers describe.
Yeah.
Even a mammoth company.
Yeah, every company is going to do this. It's smart to do it because you make more money. You're going to make money just because people are so fucking afraid of being shamed on Twitter. It's so pathetic. What a pathetic society. Oh my God.
largest Starbucks, has decided that they need to sink or swim, and the best way for them to do that is
Thought you were here with me, my boy.
Starbucks rolled out the tipping feature in stores in September 2022.
It's one thing to have a happy staff. It's another thing to have customers that are feeling resentful. I think it's a calculus that all business owners really need to.
What's the tipping point of tipping?
Do you think that they're somewhat going to start seeing that they're getting lower tips because people are paying tips to so many services, or they're...
I think that people will start doing lower tips now because COVID's not as big of a thing. As I said, I think that there was a lot of people that went into tipping in like 2021 or somewhere around there as like, okay, you're threatening to die by making sure that I get a taco. Yeah, I'll give you a taco. Sure. But I think after COVID's over, now that COVID is over, less people are going to feel compelled to tip. I think that just makes sense.
resentful of the act of tipping in general?
I think that's a very real danger. Servers in a sit-down restaurant, they were greatly affected during and immediately post-pandemic by restaurants doing all sorts of fees. Their tips were actually going down because consumers were saying, well, if I'm paying for the health insurance and I'm paying for inflation and I'm paying for this and I'm paying for that, enough is enough. The more you levy these line items onto consumers, guess who's being penalized? It's the one area that's still quasi-discretionary, which is the tip.
I went door to door.
Yeah, I ordered a fucking pizza. I was like at a meeting and I was like, well, I need something to eat. I can't leave because I'm at the meeting. So I
4
I did a
a.m.
door to, I hate fucking ordering food, but I will order food if I literally cannot leave where I need to be at. And it was like after my my podcast, and I ordered a pizza and it said it was $24. Guess how much it was? That's right, $43. Surprise. Oh, surprise, $43. How about that? Can you fucking believe that shit? It's like twice as much money. It was 2 pizzas, to be fair. Like each pizza was like $12. And I got 2 pizzas.
Talking with waitresses, bartenders, and baristas, and
Miz just like fucking puts his hand over the top pizza, just starts eating it. And like, to be fair, I will let him have a piece. But yeah, he immediately ate half of one of the pizzas. That's why I always get 2.
while they wanted to remain anonymous, they told me it's happening already. With inflation and being prompted for tips left and right, they say customers have already started to tip less and sometimes not at all.
There you go.
A 2022 study found that 17% of Americans are tipping less because of inflation.
Smart.
However, 10% report tipping more. At the same time, more than half of Americans, or 60%, want to do away with tipping entirely. The extent of pandemic-influenced generosity has also gone down. 43% of consumers typically tipped servers 20% or more in 2022, compared to 56% of consumers in 2021. Meanwhile, the average tip for full-service restaurants has gone down only slightly during the same time period. According to Toast, 19.6% in the fourth quarter of 2022, compared to 19.8% in 2021. However, according to surveys conducted in those same years, respondents said they're tipping higher percentages, 21.2% and 18.9% respectively.
It can genuinely hurt the people who truly, truly rely on gratuities for their livelihood. I firmly believe that the tipping invasion we're experiencing right now, I think it's a net negative for society.
Well, I think the whole thing is a negative. I think the entire idea that we have conditioned a group of people socially that we need to shame each other for not making up the lost wages that employers refuse to pay their employees. This is insane. Absolutely fucking crazy that this is even a consideration. I don't know how we got here. That people just accept this. And they just shame each other. They're shitting on each other because, oh, you're not giving enough money. You're not tipping enough money. Bro, you know who should be tipping the money? The fucking manager. Especially whenever you're tipping food, you're tipping money for good food. The waiter didn't even make the fucking food. Some of them share the tips, not all of them do. It's just so insane. I just lose my fucking mind. Yeah, let me give a 20 to the chef, okay? Yeah, you came by twice and you refilled my drink. No, you're not getting $17.
And with that tablet at just about every counter, no matter where you go, the question is, where's the tipping point? I'm wondering how long before I'm tipping my doctor after an annual physical.
If you want to seem especially generous after an exceptional meal, you might decide to go big and tip 30%. But it's a cycle. As more people seeking to make a good impression then up their tips to 30%, maybe even 35%, what becomes a generous tip?
I have to believe tips are going to go up from where they are today.
Of course.
But
of course they're going to go up. And here's another reason why they want to go up. Is because people want to appear wealthy. They don't want to look like a broke bitch. So not only are you being shamed, but you also have your ego to hold up. And I'm going to be honest. I don't feel bad for these people at all. If you want to be a slave to social approval from fucking losers, go ahead and tip 50%. It's not my problem. I don't care. At a certain point, you need to fucking be accountable for what you're doing with your fucking money. How is this even a question?
I also think there's got to be a logical ceiling somewhere. I just don't know where it is.
Yeah, there's got to be a ceiling. I mean, I'm sure people thought the ceiling was already a place that we're past now, so I don't really know about that, as there being a ceiling, etc. Let me read a few comments about this. I know tipping is always a very divisive topic, which is why I thought I would watch this video. There's a lot of people that don't really say what I say because it's like, I think it's like kind of mean, or it's seen as like, oh, like it's a fucking rich streamer that says don't tip people. Yeah, I don't think you should have to tip. That's right. It's the same thing with streams. You can watch a stream, like fucking stolen laptop, McDonald's Wi-Fi, filled the water cup up with soda, fucking stole the fucking guy's fries that are next to you. You're watching the stream with ad block on, gifted sub. You can do whatever you want, man. I don't give a fuck. Because I'll eventually make money, and it's not up to you. Your job is simply to entertain, to be entertained. And if I decide to do something that is too much in the favor of like money or whatever, and people don't like it, then they don't have to watch it. That's the free market. And isn't it fucking great? That is so, like, imagine if we didn't have that. Imagine if you had to pay money to watch a fucking stream. Number one, nobody'd watch any fucking streams. And number two, it would suck. So yeah, of course this would be awful. So yeah, ad block culture, yeah. And again, like, I think that the real problem with this kind of stuff is the fact that there isn't a monetization structure. Because like, I think ad block is different than tipping in a way, but with tipping especially, I do really think that they should at least pay the employees a livable wage. I hate the idea that, oh, well, you have to tip because these people aren't making minimum wage. Why aren't they making minimum wage? Like, why? Like, have we ever asked this? Like, why? This seems like a bad idea. Just make the food more expensive on the menu. Oh yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Just make the food. Yeah, I think so. Employers are required by law to make up the difference, so they are making minimum wage. Yes, I know that's true, but it's probably a big pain in the ass, and I don't really know what the difference is. But the point is that I think that they should just be required to pay minimum wage as a default. And I think that would solve, I think, a lot of the tipping problems. Because people feel like they're obligated to tip to subsidize the fact that this multi-billion-dollar corporation isn't willing to pay a livable wage for, you know, $10 an hour versus $3 an hour. No, it's so fucking annoying, man. Prices would go up drastically or restaurants would die. You think prices would go up drastically? I don't really think so, personally. I think that there's a lot of expenses in restaurants, and I think that if you increase the prices, it's the same. Like, you could make that same argument with minimum wage. Like, minimum wage has gone up, food has gone up. Yes, it has, but like that's just what happens. And also, like, I dislike the foundation of that argument and like what's behind it. So the foundation of that argument is that, well, if we pay somebody an ethical amount of money, a livable wage, we are no longer financially viable. Well, hey, if you can't afford to pay somebody a minimum wage that's fucking livable, maybe you don't deserve to be financially viable. Maybe you don't deserve that. Maybe you shouldn't have to. You maybe shouldn't be able to. That's what happens. Yeah, there's no restaurants outside of the U.S. Yeah, true. That's it. We are the only place that have any. What's this here? The Moo Kitty video exposing streamers and her whole channel got demonetized. Yeah, I heard a little bit about that. I thought that she, like, I don't know. It seemed like she was the kind of person that would just, like, farm hate on people, but I didn't really look into it that much, so I didn't talk about it or anything. It's just, like, my first impressions. So I don't know. First bad take from you? Thank God. Okay, let's go ahead and address this. Let's see what the bad take is. Okay, good. We're going to go through one of these people, and then we're going to move on. Okay. Let's go. Yep, alright. Let's see. Percentage is based off results. Treat me right, I treat you right. Respect is earned.